Welcome to this explainer on organisms and populations. If you just take a quick glance outside, nature can easily look like a totally chaotic jumble of animals and plants, right? But when you really look closely at the underlying mechanics, how organisms and populations actually operate, you discover it's not chaos at all. It is actually driven by intense mathematical precision and some truly brilliant evolutionary strategies. So let's explore those hidden forces together.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with a quick refresher on ecology, then jump right into the anatomy of a population and break down the math of how they grow. After that, we'll untangle the intricate web of interactions and the wild survival strategies different species use just to stay alive out there.
But to really ground our scientific exploration, it's always fun to look back at the human history behind it. Take Ramdeo Misra, for example, widely revered as the father of ecology in India. Born back in 1908, he practically built the entire foundation of ecological research in the country. He actually formulated the very first postgraduate ecology course at Banaras Hindu University. And his dedication in the classroom? Well, it ultimately paved the way for the establishment of the Ministry of Environment and Forest in 1984. It's just a great reminder that giant scientific leaps usually start with a few curious individuals asking the right questions.
So, as a quick foundational refresher, what exactly is ecology? Basically, it's the study of the constant, ongoing interactions among organisms and between those organisms and their physical environment. And it operates on these nested levels, starting small with individual organisms, scaling up to populations, then broader communities, and finally those massive biomes. For our purposes today, we are going to focus heavily on that absolutely crucial second level.
Zooming right into that level, we hit the population. Because in nature, you very rarely find an isolated individual just wandering alone. They live in groups, in specific geographical areas, sharing resources and potentially interbreeding. And what's really amazing is the sheer variance in scale here. I mean, a population could be a tiny, fragile group of less than 10 Siberian cranes at the Bardpur wetlands, or it could literally be millions of Chlamydomonas algae packed into a single muddy pond.
Now, here is where it gets really cool. A population actually has unique mathematical attributes that a single individual simply cannot possess. Think about it. An individual organism can only be born or die. That's it. But a population? A population has per capita birth rates and death rates. An individual is either male or female, but a population has a specific sex ratio. And if you map out the ages of all the individuals at any given time, you get an age pyramid. Just glancing at the shape of that pyramid instantly tells you if the whole population is growing, stable, or actively declining.
But of course, populations are never completely static. Their density is always fluctuating thanks to four basic push and pull processes. You've got natality, which is your influx of births, and immigration, which are newcomers moving into the area. Pushing the other way, you have mortality, the deaths, and emigration, the individuals packing up and leaving. Under normal, everyday conditions, births and deaths are definitely the heavy lifters here.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how those four biological forces translate into a remarkably elegant mathematical equation. Let's say n is your population density right now. To find the density in the future, it simply equals the original density plus the newcomers from births and immigration minus the departures from deaths and emigration. If the newcomers outnumber the departures, the population goes up. It's essentially a living ledger.
When we map out this growth over time, we start to see predictable models. On one side, we have exponential growth. This happens when resources are completely unlimited, giving us this dramatic J-curve shooting up on a graph. But, in the real world, resources are finite, and that brings us to logistic growth. Here, a population grows rapidly at first, but then it hits the environment's carrying capacity, which is the absolute maximum number of individuals that habitat can support. That creates a leveling off effect, giving us a much more realistic sigmoid or S-shaped curve.
Let's move on and see how this builds when we scale up to the broader community. We get this brilliant plus/minus matrix. It's kind of like a cheat sheet for the chaos of nature, mapping out exactly how different species interact. Plus is beneficial, minus is detrimental, and 0 is just neutral. Both species benefit, that's mutualism. Both lose, competition. One wins, one loses, you're looking at predation or parasitism. One wins and the other just doesn't care. Commensalism. And if one is harmed while the other is totally unaffected, that's called Commensalism.
Let's focus in on that plus-minus dynamic of predation for a second. When we hear predator, we usually picture a tiger chasing down its prey, right? But for plants, herbivores are the predators. And given that nearly a quarter of all insects are plant eaters, it begs the question, how on earth do plants fight off predators when they literally cannot run away?
Well, the answer is brilliant chemical warfare. Seriously, many plants produce intense chemical substances that make herbivores incredibly sick. Take the calotropis weed, for instance. It produces these highly poisonous cardiac glycosides, which is exactly why you'll see cattle instinctively avoid it. But here's the truly wild part. The stimulants and medicines we humans rely on every single day, things like nicotine, quinine, and yes, even the caffeine in your morning coffee, those actually evolved as toxic biological weapons designed to poison grazing animals.
And hey, if the predation doesn't get you, the competition just might. This brings us to a harsh rule of nature, Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. It basically dictates that two closely related species competing for the exact same limited resources cannot coexist indefinitely. The competitively inferior one will eventually be eliminated. A tragic and vivid example of this happened over in the Galapagos Islands. The massive Abingdon tortoise went entirely extinct within just a single decade after goats were introduced to the island. Why? Simply because the goats were far more efficient at browsing the exact same vegetation.
Moving along to parasitism, we usually think of creepy stuff like tapeworms or ticks, but one of the most audacious evolutionary strategies out there is brood parasitism in birds. A parasitic bird, like the cuckoo, sneaks in and actually lays its eggs in the nest of a host species, like a crow. The host then unknowingly acts as a surrogate, fully incubating the eggs and feeding the chicks. It completely hijacks their reproductive effort. It's literally an invisible evolutionary war being fought right inside the nest.
But what about an interaction where one species benefits and the other is just completely unaffected? That is commensalism, a classic plus-zero relationship. You see this when a beautiful orchid grows as an epiphyte up on a mango branch, or when barnacles attach themselves to the back of a massive whale. Neither the tree nor the whale is harmed or helped in any way. Another great example is the cattle egret. These birds hang out right next to grazing cattle because the cattle stir up insects as they stomp through the grass. It gives the egrets a free and easy meal without bothering the cattle at all.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next point, which is the tight plus-plus relationship of mutualism. But sometimes, mutualism comes with a pretty wild twist. Consider the strategy of sexual deceit. The Mediterranean orchid, Ophrys, relies entirely on bees for pollination. But instead of offering sweet nectar, like a normal flower, it physically mimics the look, the scent, and even the tactile cues of a female bee. It tricks the poor male bee into trying to mate with the flower, completely dusting him with pollen in the process. I mean, it's mutualism achieved through spectacular evolutionary catfishing. No other way to put it.
So all of these interactions, the math, the chemical warfare, the sheer deceit, they all weave together into a highly sensitive interconnected web, which leaves us with a pretty provocative question. What actually happens when you remove just a single thread? Well, on the American Pacific coast, scientists ran an experiment where they removed just one predator, the Paseister starfish. Within a single year, over 10 species of invertebrates went extinct in that area purely from an explosion of unchecked competition. It really leaves you wondering, as we go about our modern daily lives, which invisible threads of this fragile balance are we unknowingly pulling? Thanks for exploring this with me today.